My name is Lynn Lowry. I've been in business development over 30 years and primarily in the life science and diagnostic space. So about 15 of those years have been spent in product development. So just to give you a little update on how this will work today, you might see a chat area on the right side of your screen. And in that area, you can ask questions of our speakers at any time. And what we'll plan to do is after each speaker finishes, we'll do a short Q&A after the first one, and then we'll have both of them come back on after the second talk, and then go ahead and have a Q&A. So if you can just paste your questions there, we will get to them. If for some reason we aren't able to get all the questions, though, we can do a follow-up after the fact. So that is where you can do that. So while we are, I think we're ready to go. So I just want to tell you a little bit about medical device playbook. So this used to be an in-person event that we would run in 2 cities, Toronto and Vancouver. And it was a great forum that we could actually provide to let people hear interesting stories from entrepreneurs, leaders in the medical device space. And it's a place that we could share success stories or challenges that may help others as they build medical device or life science businesses. So obviously we weren't able to do this in-person event this year, so we tried to figure out a way that we might be able to launch this virtually. And we've been running these webinars now. I think this is our 4th or 5th one. They seem to be well received, and we've got a good audience for that. So we're really happy to have you today to join a really interesting talk that we have. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So what I'd like to do now is tell you a little bit more about Starfish Medical. We are a company located in Toronto and Victoria. We've got about 130 plus staff members, and we've got over 21 years developing medical device. About 70% of our client base is located in the US, and we exclusively work on medical device and products. And this is just a little bit of a few clients that we've worked with, a variety of companies over the years. So as you can see, we've worked with really large companies and small companies to help with their product realization. So you are most likely going to hear a story relating to 1 or 2 of these companies today. And as you can see from our product portfolio, we've had a development hand in a large number of products, both large and small devices, and have launched in a number of markets: ophthalmology, imaging, point of care devices, and life sciences. So now while I introduce the next couple of people, I'm going to have Mike launch the 3rd poll, and I'll introduce to you. First up is going to be Scott Phillips.
Thanks, Lynn. Scott, I'm the CEO and founder of Starfish Medical. My role today is fairly limited. I'll just be running the Q&A at the end. So get your Q&As ready as the speakers speak. And once they're both done, we'll have a session to dig under the surface and get some deeper insights. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. Scott's got a real value or passion for innovation and helping clients create value. So appreciate you being on today, Scott.
Thank you.
Next up is our first speaker. We've got 2 speakers today, and John Walmsley will be kicking us off. John is an expert in product development, innovation, and team building. He's got over 25 years of experience with device technology companies in the UK, the US, and Canada. He started his career in the fiber optic revolution that powered the internet boom, and then at Starfish has overseen the design of over 150 medical device products. He is a fellow at the UK Institute of Physics with a master's in optoelectronics. In the past 7 months, John has been leading Starfish's ultra-fast ICU ventilator development program and is looking forward to talking to you today about the essence of that project and a few others. So I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And as you said, Starfish is a product and technology resource company. We're all about developing products. And so the focus today is I wanted to give you a few stories of products that we've developed set in this framework of time, cost, and quality trade-off. And then I'm really looking forward to a conversation that we're going to have at the end about that. So the first thing is we started with this headline and we said when time is paramount, and the question is, over what? And probably most of you watching have seen something like this before, which talks about the three constraints that a project typically sits under: the time, the cost, and then the scope of the project. For those of you who haven't seen this, I'm sure you've seen something similar to this. We offer three kinds of service: good, cheap, fast, but you can only pick two. When you see that, what that usually means, or certainly in my own experience, is we're going to do this my way, and I don't want you to complain about how long it takes or how much it costs. So I'm not a big fan of that approach, but I do find this triple constraint really useful in a way of talking about projects and the approach that we're interested in taking to them. The interesting thing about them is, of course, the three of them aren't optimized in the same direction. The bottom two, cost and time, generally seen as good when they're low, and scope, generally seen as good when it's high or ambitious. What do we mean by scope? Scope's what we get delivered, what we get done at the end. It could be effectiveness of the product, medical device. It could be the breadth of features. It could be the robustness, the user delight, the market size addressed, all of those and more. So the question that we face as we conceive of creating a product and potentially a company around that product is, are we willing to spend more to get done faster or have a better solution? Are we willing to settle for a lesser solution to keep to time and cost? Or would we be okay to wait longer to get to a better answer? So what I wanted to do today, ahead of that, to get that conversation going, was just talk to you a few stories about some examples from Starfish's own portfolio. And where I thought I'd start was on this combination where time and what we're getting done is the most important thing. What if we spend what's needed to get done what we need when we need it? And typically the space is populated by incumbent companies and well-funded VC-funded startups. And if the objective isn't achieved in time, there's no point in doing it, or at least for the responsible executives in charge. The focus is all about what we're getting done and when we're getting done by, and we're going to spend what it takes within reason to get there. It rarely, of course, happens purely, and of all of the three variants, this is the one where you're most likely to get screwed if the constraint changes partway through. To get us into that, I talk about a project that I happen to have at my fingertips. This is a little different of an example. This fits into the category of responding to an urgent national need. You can see here, you may have heard that Starfish has been working very hard to design, develop, manufacture, and deliver a large number of ventilators to fill perceived gap for ICU ventilators. 6th of April, the Prime Minister announced that we would be working on this project. And June 19th, we made our successful Health Canada submission, which is crazy fast. This is a project that typically takes 3 years or more to achieve. So the big question is, how could you possibly have achieved that, John? So, give you a few key items that the themes that I think we've picked up, and as one day I'd like to tell this story in more detail. But the first thing is there's a really clear objective to this project, very easy to get everyone focused on and to understand. There is a mechanical ventilation for an ICU is a well-defined thing. There's a standard, ISO 8601 tells you what the essential performance of an ICU level ventilator is. And on the other side, that's the scope. And then on time, people are going to die if we don't get this done quickly. So for us, when we came out of the gates real fast, was we cleared up the regulatory strategy. We spoke to Health Canada within 2 weeks of starting the project. We brought together a core team. The core had almost 1,000 years of product development experience between them. They all dropped a rung or two in their careers so that they were working in an area that they really knew how to do. And we started off by getting a well-defined and described architecture for what we were going to do, broken down, so that then it could be distributed. For instance, we wrote our own firmware in C from scratch to control this as a Class C software, level 3 life-sustaining device, Class 3 life-sustaining device. Mechanically, the subsystems of the ventilator were broken down so that they could be distributed to a network of Canadian companies who could respond. If you remember those difficult times, nationalism and national borders had become a significant issue in supply chain. And so we had made a commitment to the government that we would avoid the conventional supply chain and work with Canadian companies. So we did that. Many of them not being medical device companies, we had to use quality plan system to bring them up to medical standards, but they did. And their task was to deliver finished, tested good systems for final integration. So as they helped us with bandwidth and reducing risk to develop those components, they also committed to deliver the systems tested good so that we were not worrying about units ending up at the end, and the integration risk was significantly lower. We also had input from a significant number of very experienced key opinion leaders, respiratory therapists, spoke to them multiple times a day. Our human factors and industrial design team drove every detail on this user interface that you can see there. It had to be easy to supervise for non-specialists operating it, potentially, orthopedic surgeons, medical students in corridors. And our design team, first of all, they had to match the user's need. And the second of all, they had to design for the manufacturer, which in this case was a very interesting company called Yorkville Sound that makes musical instruments for Canadian Long & McQuaid, national music chain. And so it was a balance of what could the manufacturer do, what did the user need to see. We also, in the course of this, brought on a very experienced medical device contract manufacturer to help with that final integration and control and solve so many of the supply chain problems. A very fine company called Celestica. They were flexible and supportive the whole way through, even if we were still designing the product as we engaged. And that's a little unusual for them. And I'm sure Kevin can tell you more about how that was. Design for manufacturing and supply chain were essential. There was no point in developing a ventilator if it couldn't be made as needed. If the quantity of parts that weren't available, weren't available on the timeline that we needed, the part needed to be replaced. If a feature couldn't be conceived and resolved in time, it was dropped. Unless, of course, it was essential performance, then we had to innovate a solution. So, and then you can look at this and you can see, while industrial design was very heavily focused on that user interface, the cart itself was designed by a mechanical engineer and the sheet metal shop that was making it. It was not pretty, but it's just flexible in case of fit and alignment issues at the end. The last thing to be designed was how this whole thing went together, and it needed to be flexible and not relying on a critical path through an injection molding shop. So that was the choices that we made. Every option that we took had a couple of explicit alternate paths. And then while this team who knew what they were doing got on with it, we had a team of project managers and systems engineers documenting and making sure that key questions were raised at key times and things weren't forgotten. And the whole thing, of course, was backstopped by a thorough and detailed verification testing against our specification to be sure that we designed the right product. So if we could spend more to go faster, to give us options, or to backstop risk, we did it. So this was not cheap, but it is good, and it was fast. So that's an example that happy to talk more about, but I thought you'd be interested in more stories than simply that one. So I have one other example that fits into this category. This is a company called Novadac. Novadac has a great technology that was used for imaging capillary flow during reconstructive surgery, typically. They had a launch strategy which was a no or low capital cost and then a fee per use model. And they connected with a very, very well-established distribution partner who would get those instruments into the market very quickly. But the system that they have that you see on the left here didn't meet the needs. They wanted something that looked more professional, and they wanted it in a hurry. So they came to visit us in August, and we did the sketch that you see in the middle while they were on site. And then by January, we were shipping dozens a week of the system that you see on the right. Now, this is, in fact, we manufactured the first hundreds of units. It was important. This is something that Starfish does. We don't scale to Celestica's level, but for early launch, and you want to keep close to the design team and deal with all of the churn, that worked very well. As a project, there's a lot of details here. It was a very expensive stress test. Every early unit that shipped was as planned, had to come back to have the plastic housings that you see here that were 3D printed, replaced with injection molded parts, and a bunch of other features added and changed. But that was something that Novadac were very comfortable and signed up to do, and we were as well. And it resulted in a great success for them, and in time, an exit to Stryker for $1 billion. I would say the key thing there was a team that worked closely together and accepted the consequences of the decisions that were being made in the time, and that they would be expensive, but that something that was good enough would be shipped on the time that was required. So what if we look at the other side of things? What if we look at constraining cost and time? Now, if you can kind of see how this could be bad. If you're, it's kind of like giving your project to your accountant. Just keep it cost and get it done soon, and that'll be great. And another way of looking at this is many startups come and they say, or individuals who have ideas, they say, it's a common question to be asked: how much will it cost to develop my product, and how long will it take? It's very rare to be asked, how good can you make my product? But in this case, there's a path to success here, and the path involves having a really clear and constrained scope and allowing yourself to float it a little in order to keep your time and costs in hand. And so I've got a couple of examples here where companies successfully did that. This is Martin de Vlieger. Martin is an amazing person, has a very, very full life. He also lives with cystic fibrosis. It's a little unusual for people with cystic fibrosis. He always says to have such a full life. One of the secrets is having your lungs cleared early in the morning, and there are many devices available to do that. He couldn't find an adequate solution. So in his own shop, and you can see the picture on the left here, he took an old drill, he took a lump of aluminum, he mounted it eccentrically on the drill, and then he welded the whole thing into an aluminum curious, which he mounted on his chest and turned it on in the morning with the switch connected to mains that you can see there. And that did a great job of clearing his chest, and he could have a full day afterwards. But it didn't work so great for others. Others weren't so keen on the form factor. His sister, also has cystic fibrosis, wasn't keen. So Martin wanted to do something for other people. Cystic fibrosis is a small market, but he very much had great interest to take it forward and make it available. So he came to us, and really what we wanted to do for him was show him what is a minimally viable product here that he can, and in this case, of course, when you talk about minimally viable, the secret is viable is the key word. And so in this case, it had to be sufficient to catch the attention of any incumbent who'd be interested and achieve an exit so that the product went to market. So we used here, you can see mounted in the black lumps, if you like, voice coils, off-the-shelf voice coils that we procured. Very tempted to design our own that would be smaller, more effective, more efficient, but no, went with the off-the-shelf units, created this conceptual configuration. The aesthetic matched Martin's interests a lot. There's a control box that you can kind of see hidden behind his hip, was a little larger than desired, but it was easy to troubleshoot for a first version. And so we built this for him. He used it. It was great. And then he was able to tour it on a road show, and Hill-Rom were interested and obliged by making the acquisition and evolving the design and bringing it to market. In this case, Martin had a really good understanding of his marketplace. And the team that we engaged on it were small and had a very tight focus on only achieving what he needed in order to get his achievement and get the interest in the other company from other companies. PAMA Medical was a Shifamed company. Shifamed's a very interesting and successful business model. Pre-revenue exit is their plan. They spend time. Remember, here we're talking about constraining, being efficient with time and cost in order to achieve and not worrying so much about the grand scope. In this case, they spend time to incubate projects within their larger company so that they can understand the essence of the market that they're targeting and what the exit potential is and what's the minimally viable product, again, that will address that market. And then once they've identified something, they spin off a company, and then they look to quickly and cash efficiently realize that essence, that minimally viable product, and then hand it off for an exit to an incumbent who can then take it to market. And so in this case, this is an electrophysiological treatment for atrial fibrillation. There's a picture there of the therapeutic component, and this was something that they developed on their own through their small company, and took it to a sufficient trial to show efficacy. But one of the questions that came up for this is this device inside patient's heart. Could doctors control it easily? How do they control it? It's a critical part of the solution, and something they didn't have the skills within their company at all to address. So they came to us and asked that question: what interface would allow a doctor control this easily? So we did a bunch of work, very targeted on creating concepts that we conceptualized, and then we mocked up into an interface. Clinicians used the interface. It wasn't driving anything, but it was providing it had the effect mocked up. The clinicians found it intuitively effective. A panel were then able to take their whole story on the road, and Boston Scientific were interested enough to acquire it. And you can see on the two pictures of the interface. The top one is Kim doing the design work on the interface, and the bottom photograph is the team from Boston Scientific visited the visit associated with that acquisition. So a very successful way for both of those companies to achieve exits by not spending a lot of money and not spending a lot of time, but efficiently just moving to a useful solution. And I should say, if you're interested in the ShifaMed business model, Amarcele's talk is on our website. You can probably find it in the same areas as these webinars. So then the last look at the last way of doing a triple constraint is the bootstrapped startup. This is probably the norm for most startups. So where time is not really paramount, because we're not really clear where the money's coming from. There is money. There's there's an ambitious scope, but which pieces to do in which order to be ready to achieve that. And in this case, the company may be going to go the whole way themselves, or they may be heading for the more classic regulatory approval, revenue achieved exit, or exiting at another point. So, but it's a very classic way of going, and it has lots of successes and lots of failures, like many. I'm going to talk a little bit of two examples of people who did this well and achieved an impressive goal for themselves. This can be, as I said, the bootstrap startup. It could also be a skunkworks activity that's happening at an incumbent, where there's interest in spending a little bit of money and moving towards an ambitious scope before fully engaging and making commitments to senior management on timelines. So on this, we're going for great at a low spend without worrying too much about time. And done well, it's characterized by research, very targeted study, periods of review and reflection, lots of experimentation and iteration, and typically best achieved at the starting point with a small creative team who understand the potential and the options, and aren't afraid to start over when they discover something else even better. So I'll give you two examples, and then they're kind of interesting because they both transition into one of the other modes that we were talking about. So this is a company called Micropharma. Micropharma was a Montreal company working on a nutraceutical with Danone, actually, the yogurt company. And as they were working in the gastrointestinal tract, they were interested to know what's happening with the biome there. And it struck them, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could take a sample? And it's hard to take a sample in the small intestine. Anything past the stomach or past the lower colon is a hard area to take any samples, or impossible to take samples from. They thought, well, what if we took a pill that could travel through the body and then know where it was, take a sample that we can analyze? That would be awesome, and it would really help our research. So they started this work off the side of the desk. They brought in a bright young engineer to dig into it and made good progress. But eventually it was clear they needed some more horsepower, so they came to Starfish. And so our team started with a paper study on localization methods. pH is an obvious one, that you know if you're in the stomach or not. Looked at a whole bunch of other sensing options, discarded a few, including pH. It's expensive. Tried a few on the bench, and then built some prototypes. And so the micropharma had a model that they used to test these prototypes, and one solution seemed like it kind of worked. So we did a bunch more thinking with them back and forward on that, thought about some algorithms that could be associated with it, added some more sensors, made another prototype, and then we iterated a few times. And I'd be lying, by the way, if I said the first prototype that went in worked great. But it had enough promise that we continued and did the iterations. And as progress was made, we added more features. So as the sensing localization seemed to be working, we added the algorithmic work could be done off the side, and then we started adding the sampling method and trying to understand if you could run it. And I guess I should have said earlier on scale. So you can see these surface mount resistors, and you can see these coin cell batteries. This is small, right? Let's think of it it's about 10 millimeters across. So it's big when you come to swallow it. It's small when you're trying to fit something inside it. But anyway, at the end, it was pretty good at knowing its location, and it could activate a sampling mechanism and take a sample. And there was still work to be done to optimize it. But at that point, they sold their nutraceutical business and then took this technology and were acquired by a company called Progenity, who then raised over $100 million into the business to exploit it. And at that point, we're now on a different section of the talk. We did a whole bunch more work on a different timeline, a different pressure. But it was the slow, efficient work at the start that really set the path to success. And then my last example is a company called Home Dialysis Plus. So there is in Seattle, there's a dialysis technician whose mother had renal failure, and he'd had to provide dialysis for her at home. And for 40 years, he'd been a dialysis tech. He was a huge proponent of home dialysis. The structure of the industry in the US, however, was that it was all provided in center. So he was really keen to develop a home dialysis solution. He came across an entrepreneur who Starfish knew, and the two of them liked each other and liked the problem and started thinking about solutions. That entrepreneur, he identified a few technologies over the years that he thought could help. And so he built a small, informal executive team. They met infrequently. And he spent a couple of years quietly building relationships with these technology bases. He acquired IP rights. He got to know the incumbents, the supply chain, and just generally built a company in concept that had the ambition and the wherewithal to deliver on the promise. We talked to Starfish as well. We gave him some conceptual ideas, but no bench testing of anything real. And then based on that business model and a bunch of work, he did some due diligence. I remember I was in the room when he met with Warburg Pincus, and as a result of that, they offered to give him $50 million to make this real. And of course, at that point, everything changed. So we're back to that other model, and the small informal team became very real. A large development team. We grew a team. We rented extra space to do the work, and we accelerated through to this test bed. And you can see this picture on the left. It's big, it's see-through, and it's easy to change components in and out as we have better ideas. We made better discoveries, and it's well instrumented, so we could do lots of studies. So that's the first functioning dialyzer that HD Plus ever made. And on the right, you can see Outset Medical's dialyzer that they've gone to market with. That's who HD Plus is transformed into, and they just went public at $2 billion, and they're launching well into homes and hospitals. But the foundation of all of this was that breadth of vision and the assets developed in the first 2 years as time was spent to move towards that ambitious goal. So to summarize, you have to ask yourself, we ask ourselves, are we willing to spend more to get done faster or have a better solution? Do we want to settle for a lesser solution to keep to time and cost? Or are we willing to wait longer for a better answer? And circumstances may dictate how you go. But I would say, in conclusion, you need to pick two and be successful. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thanks. So I was expecting Lynn or Scott to come back at this point. Excellent. There's Lynn.
John, we did get one question that maybe you could answer, and we'll get the other slides teed up. But when you were dealing with government departments, did you have a sense they were moving as quickly as you needed them to move? And a little bit of an example.
That is an awesome question. So, at the start, absolutely. If you think about negotiating with large organizations when you're in a hurry and they're not, it's horrible. But when you're negotiating with a large organization in a hurry, it's amazing how fast they can move and how quickly they can get stuff done. So yes, it was very, very fast. One of the interesting things about this whole COVID response is that, of course, even still, as I understand it, and fingers crossed it stays that way, no one's actually dying because they don't have a ventilator. But we don't know where things are going to go. And certainly during the summer, Health Canada had a lot of priorities to review, and they took longer to review than they had said they would, a lot longer than they said they would. That did delay us. But in general, I would say they were all, there's nuance to it, but at the start, they worked very, very quickly. And by and large, we've been masters of our own destiny. They were, I would say the IRAP program was enormously helpful in providing a network of suppliers. And then Health Canada, as I say, we wish they'd reviewed faster, but I think we understand that they have to live with their decision in the long term as well, and they had a lot of other priorities. So,
yeah, great. Well, I'm sure there will be some other questions as we get to the end, and if people can just post your question in the Q&A chat, we'll get to the answers in the end. So I'll have Kevin now join, if he could, and I'll introduce Kevin. So let's see here. Thank you, Kevin. Hi. Yeah, hi. So we are honored to have Kevin Walsh join us today, and Kevin is the Vice President of Celestica's Health Tech segment. He spent 20 years, he's held various leadership roles within Celestica, which is a trusted provider of design, manufacturing, and supply chain solutions. Throughout Kevin's career, he's worked closely with top-tier medical OEMs and startups from across the globe to help them balance and achieve critical goals, including expedited time to market. So today, during Kevin's talk, he's going to share some of the most important product commercialization lessons he has learned throughout his career. Thanks a lot for being with us, Kevin. I'm just going to sneak in a happy birthday to you because he agreed to join us on his birthday. So appreciate that.
You weren't supposed to tell anybody that. So hi everybody. Delighted to be here. Thanks to the Starfish team for the opportunity to speak with you today. Actually, you have the advantage of having two guys with Irish accents talk to you on this particular call today. So, getting into the presentation, just first of all, I suppose, just give you an introduction to Celestica, give you a sense of what we do, what kind of company we are, etc. So, a Canadian company. It was actually an IBM management buyout back in 1996, and the company has grown since then. We're approximately $6 billion in revenue right now, across about 13 different countries, multiple locations in certain countries. And probably most importantly for the audience today, of the top 25 medical device companies worldwide, we're doing work with 10 of those at the moment, and hopefully some more in the not too distant future. And the type of work that we're doing for those companies varies, but if you look at the 5 elements of the chevron in the center of the chart, we're doing everything from DFX type work with these companies all the way to aftermarket solutions and logistical solutions that we have. In between, we're helping our customers through MPIs, building prototypes, etc. for them. I suppose the core portion of our business is in the center, where we're doing manufacturing, and that manufacturing is everything from the classical PCBA electronic manufacturing to full systems builds, and for our medical device customers, doing a lot of surgical instruments, minimal invasive surgical tools, etc. So quite a variety of manufacturing. And then also managing the various supply chains for those customers as well. So quite a varied scope, and hopefully I can bring some of the learnings from that scope to the audience here today. So, you know, if I think of all the folks on the phone, you know, if you're trying to bring your product to market, you have a whole lot of things on your mind. You need to figure out what the patient wants, and you need to meet that demand. The business case is extraordinarily important. You know, money doesn't grow on trees, as they say. So you have to figure out where you're getting your money from and how you actually can achieve your targets with the amount of money that you have. You have the FDA or Health Canada in the background. So you have to meet the requirements that they set out, which in turn, you know, provides for the safety of the end patients. And then you need to reach your desired scale. So, you know, those are only a few. There's a whole plethora of items that are going through your mind. So what I decided to do today, and hopefully it'll work for everybody, is pick out a number of areas, a small number of areas where I think, you know, ordinarily sometimes you may not think of these things. So, you know, I'm going to point to a few areas. The areas that I will focus on are around manufacturability. I'll talk also about the supply chain, setting up the supply chain, and you know how complex or simple that can be depending upon the particular product that you have. I'm going to talk about process FMEA, and we're going to talk about DHOs, such that you can get a sense of my experiences across those areas. So, manufacturability. You know, companies like Starfish will do a great job for you in relation to working on that functional design. But, you know, once you get to that functional design, that's probably only half the story. There's a lot more other elements that we need to look at. And as I go through my presentation today, I'll probably just highlight some of those areas to make sure that you're looking at as many areas as you can. Next one up then is the actual supply chain. And I'll show you some data from supply chain analysis just to kind of show you how complex it can be, the lead times, how complex they are at the moment. So there's a lot of things to be careful about when you're actually organizing your supply chain for your new product. We'll talk about a process FMEA. For those of you not familiar with the acronym, this is failure mode and effects analysis. So we're going to do that analysis on the actual process. And I guarantee you, if you spend time there, do a good job there, you will actually help mitigate a lot of risk for later on in your project. And then finally, in relation to DHR, we all know the importance of documentation as it pertains to medical devices. You know, you're going through, you're doing all your filings, your 510Ks, et cetera, but it's at one stage then you're going to have to start looking at your device history record as well. Sometimes people don't spend enough time looking at that, and there can be a lot of errors as a result. So I'm going to just talk about some of the experiences that I had there also. So, design for manufacturability, or DFX as it's sometimes referenced. So I suppose that the key message that I have for you is it's really important to do a comprehensive DFX after you have finished your functional design. And you should, if you don't have the skills yourself, you should partner with somebody who has the skills and maybe more importantly, has the tools to do a proper DFX. And as the chart suggests, it will reduce your risk, it will lower your cost, it will improve your quality, and it will improve your speed to market. So then when you start looking at your DFX, there's a whole plethora of items to look at, you know, and you can see them referenced here: DFM, DFT, DFA, etc. So you're looking at manufacturability, testability, assembly, the ability to do automated assembly if your form factor or indeed your volumes necessitate that, and then the risks associated with your supply chain. So quite simply put, if you have a PCBA or a complex electromechanical system, how are you going to test it? Have you test points ready, etc., to make sure that when it comes to testing, that it can be done, that the manufacturer you're going to use has the appropriate equipment to test this, etc. On supply chain, there's a whole lot of things to look at. There are so many suppliers out there with so many varied lead times, with so much variation in price. You need to be very, very careful on who you're actually designing into your overall design. You would be astonished at the amount of times that early stage companies come to us. They present us with a bill of material. The first analysis that we do on that bill of material is obsolescence. And you would be astonished at how many times we find multiple components on that particular BOM that we know through our interaction with the suppliers that we know will become obsolete in the very, very near future. So this type of activity is really, really important. And just another item actually that I think is important to mention at this stage is if you have a larger complex device and you are designing into that device consumer products. So for example, if your product requires a PC and you decide to design in a consumer PC, you need to be really, really careful of those types of decisions because the consumer market is moving at lightning pace. PCs are becoming obsolete and new ones coming out every 6 months. And if you actually follow that route of designing in a consumer product, you'll spend so much time in the future revalidating, and revalidating. So as well as doing the DFX activity, just be careful what consumer sub-assemblies that you are actually designing into your overall device. Design for manufacturability. So the example that I have here, this is a negative pressure wound therapy device that we actually that we're manufacturing now on behalf of one of our customers. In this particular situation, the customer came to us. They felt that they had a product that was ready for prime time. They wanted it just manufactured, and we said, okay, let's hold our horses for a moment, and let's do some analysis on your design before diving into manufacturing. And in this situation, we actually used a software platform called Valor. And we went through a DFX analysis on their particular board. And in this situation, we found 19 issues that would affect the yield and the performance of the product. And some of these issues can be really simple, and I've highlighted some here. So we've situations here where we have spacing violations. So what we will actually do is we'll take the Valor software tool, and then we'll apply to that tool our internal guidelines. So these are guidelines that we have drafted and modified for ourselves as we've gained experience over the years. So we'll take these rules, apply these rules into Valor, and then Valor will actually give us out the results. And in this situation, it's telling us there's multiple spacing validations. Those spacing validations lead to a situation where we have what we call hot issues in certain areas of the board, and we had to go and work with the customer to have those issues or to have that board redesigned such that we could get rid of those issues prior to going into manufacturing. Now you can imagine if we just went in headlong, started manufacturing boards, started assembling those into systems, it could be sometime down the road when the customer would see problems in the field, and then you have a completely different kettle of fish associated with fixing that particular problem. Design for test. I've taken the liberty here of actually using John's ventilator in this particular situation. So when John and the team came to us, they had almost finished their design. Obviously, they understood the importance of DFX activities or DFT activities in this instance. So they actually got us to run some analysis. In this particular situation, we use a software tool called Testway. And we were going with the principle that we were going to use ICT at the board level testing and then have a functional test at the end of our process. So for those of you not familiar, ICT is in-circuit testing. It's a bed of nails platform, and it's used to check the continuity of all the connections on the board. When John came to us initially, there was sufficient test points to test about 40% of the board. By making some simple changes, we were able to change that to 80%. We moved away from a flying probe concept associated with test to an ICT concept, and that ICT concept allowed us to have probably at minimum 4x the speed going through our process of having these particular boards tested. So by doing this DFX, by increasing your test coverage, by using the latest technology in ICT, definitively you will improve your yield. It'll increase dramatically. Your test escapes rates will be improved. It'll go down. Design specifications will be met, and your test coverages will go way up. So that was the example from a DFT perspective. So that's kind of my first topic. Second topic, supply chain. And again, taking the themes that John had referenced of quality, speed, cost. As you go through alpha, beta builds on into volume builds, you need to think about how you're going to manage your supply chain. So here's some items that I suggest you think about. First of all, where are you going to get your parts from? You have the material suppliers, Samsung, Panasonic, Murata, Vishay, the list is endless in terms of the suppliers that are out there. Are you going to contact them directly? Are you going to go to distributors? So, we have Avnet, Arrow, DigiKey, Fortune. There's a long list of distributors out there also. But when would you go to those guys? Or, there's brokers. Do you go to the brokers, or is there some alternative source? So, my advice to you is, look at the areas where you need speed. If it's a situation that you have the time, go to the material suppliers themselves. The vast majority of those will sell direct. You'll get the best price, best lead time, typically in that fashion. There are a number of suppliers, however, who won't sell direct, and then in that situation, you will need to go to distributors. I've mentioned a number of their names. Go to the well-known guys. In some situations, they have parts on the shelf, and that may help with your lead time. But these, the distributors that I mentioned, those guys are completely trustworthy, and it's the same as buying the parts directly from the suppliers themselves. From a broker perspective, I suppose caution should be taken in relation to dealing with the brokers. There's a lot of extraordinarily reputable companies out there, and then there are others who are not so reputable. So make sure you understand one from the other. Make sure you go to the reputable companies, and just be careful as you go. These guys are buying and selling componentry, so they're certainly an avenue where you can go and look for parts, especially if you're really, really under pressure for lead time. But be careful. We had a situation back in 2019 where we had MLCC, and these were capacitor shortages that we had globally. These shortages predominantly came from an explosion in consumer products, mobile phones, etc. And that left the whole industry searching for parts. And in that time period, the amount of counterfeit parts that came on the market was absolutely astonishing. And a lot of those counterfeit parts found their way to the market through, less than scrupulous brokers. So just be careful with counterfeits. But that's the kind of ecosystem of where you can get your parts. Next item here, and I'm not going to go through line by line here on this particular chart, but just to give you a sense of the various commodities that are out there, the lead time that I'm showing, and let's say in the case of ASEX, that's 14 to 16 weeks. The supply condition, whether it's stable, whether it's increasing, and when I say increasing is there's more demand and you're going to see a situation where your lead time will increase as a result, and potentially your price will increase as a result. So the item that I want you to take from this particular chart is to look at the lead times. Look at the amount of weeks in question. I suppose there's two things to look at: the scale and the actual variety. So you need to be careful. You need to be thinking ahead and making sure that you're making your orders on time, because a lot of these components are, on very, very long lead times. If I go to my next slide, it's just a similar slide taking different commodities. Back in 2019, Celestica understood the problem. The problem was predominantly with these MLCCs. And what we did at the time is, rather than purchasing to demand and purchasing to our customer demand, what we actually did is we just went out and bought a huge order. And by buying in that huge order, I suppose we got the attention of the suppliers. They gave us the product versus multiple smaller orders from elsewhere. And that actually, those kind of activities happen. So it makes it very, very difficult for small companies on their own then to get supply in a very constrained market. The other item I'll mention on this particular chart is, if you look at the bottom there, enclosures, sheet metal, castings, plastics, typically what we would classify collectively as the build-to-print items. Those items typically don't have as high of a lead time as your electronic items. So I'm not saying don't pay attention to them, but I'm just saying you have a little bit of more leeway when it comes to those guys. So just I suppose stating or summarizing some of the points that I've made. So early bomb analysis mitigates obsolescence risk, and trust me, that's happening all the time. I would say every second bomb that we look at has obsolescence problems. Also, by doing that analysis, you'll be able to plan for second source for critical parts. Don't ever go forward with a bill of material where you have a singular part, single source. You will get into trouble. Make sure that you have second and third sources for every single line item in your bomb. Leverage approved supply base to eliminate and minimize supplier qualification times. And then leverage existing qualified parts where possible. Then looking at, from a supply chain, looking at it from a quality perspective, normal medical products take a long, long time to develop and, for you to develop the supply chain. So, it may be stating the obvious, but, consolidate your supply base by leveraging existing suppliers. So look at trusted suppliers, look at pre-qualified components, and simplify your overall regulatory compliance path. And then my final slide as it pertains with supply chain, in relation to the built-to-print items, I'm kind of stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 here, and the larger portion is referencing just some things to think about and some possible solutions when it comes to built-to-print. And then the smaller box on the bottom right is referencing the actual bare board in a PCBA. So just looking at built-to-print, first of all, so for all the built-to-print parts that we worked through with John and the team on the ventilator, for the proto phase, we looked at small batch production, and we did go to higher cost, quick turn suppliers that gave us rapid prototyping. That helped us make sure that the design was good and get us to market as quickly as possible. Then stage 2, we took a kind of a first tranche of product. We looked at the first 1,500 units. We went with local and low-cost suppliers, a mixture of both, we focused in on lead time, and we slowly then started to transition those guys to our final build-to-print suppliers. And those final build-to-print suppliers were typically low-cost geography guys, where we could actually negotiate the very, very best pricing. And typically what we do is we give them a blanket PO for a large volume. And in that blanket PO process, you're going to optimize the actual or minimize the cost that your unit part will be. In the case of the actual bare board, we did a similar exercise. We had a local supplier starting off with, that was a local guy in Canada. They were able to give us a 3-day turn. So that helped in all the prototyping at the very beginning. Then secondly, we moved to a 3-week turn supplier. And just to give you economies of scale, that was around a 30% cost reduction from the 3-day turn guy. And then finally, we moved to an Asia-based supplier. And that's actually, just again, to give you economies of scale, a 50% cost reduction on the local guy who was able to give us a 3-day turn. So I suppose the message here, quite simply, is, think of it in phases. Pick your local quick turn guys to start off with, and as you go through the phases, start moving then towards your volume suppliers, typically based in lower cost geographies. Okay, so that was supply chain. Next up then, we'll just talk about process FMEA. For those of you who are experienced in manufacturing, you're probably saying, Kevin, this is common sense. This is, everybody should do this. And that's probably a true statement. But I suppose my feedback to everybody on the call is, make sure you don't give process FMEA lip service. Make sure you're not doing it to tick a box on your validation journey. My message to you is, it's an extremely good tool. If you spend the time, do it right, it will pay for itself 10 times over, because the amount of errors, the amount of problems that you will actually find at this stage and not at a later stage when you're out in production is great. So to do a good FMEA, first of all, you need people, and you need the right people, and you need a good cross-functional team. So folks from the design engineering group, folks from the manufacturing group, folks from quality, folks from supply chain. You need to make sure that you're getting everybody's perspective and bring all the folks on board. You need to come to the meetings with all the right information. Have you got your critical quality data? Have you got your critical parts list? Have you got your drawings? All of that information needs to be brought, and it needs to be accurate and the latest rev. For all the managers out there, I would say make sure you give the team the time and the space to be focused. It's an iterative type process where you need to go through step by step and make sure that you're capturing all the probabilities, all the possibilities. So give the time, give the people the time, make sure that they're focused, make sure that they're not distracted. Allow them the time to execute really, really well. And then the outcome will be, controls that will make your manufacturing process far, far, far more robust, and have a situation where you have a much better chance of delivering a very quality product to your end customer. This particular example, we had a medical device customer of ours come to us again. They came saying, here's the finished article. We want you to go manufacturing it. The particular product here is a sports medicine implant. So they came, they had on their process FMEA, they had identified 66 high-risk items that needed to be mitigated in one way or another. So we asked them, as a matter of our own internal processes, even though it was going to take them time, and to be fair to them, they gave the time, we asked them, could we go through it again? However, in this situation, could we go through it with our guys present as well? And could we be really focused? In actual fact, we came up with 57 more high-risk failure items were found in the process of FMEA. So in this situation, we have an 86% increase in the discovered failure items, and we've calculated ourselves that we have had a 46% reduction in our final assembly DPMO, which is a huge figure, especially when we kind of consider that we're manufacturing medical devices in this instance, and failure really isn't an option. Some of you out there will have products. Those products will either through their miniaturization require automation, or through their volume may require automation. So figuring out, is your product designed for automation? Can it be assembled at scale with bespoke equipment? So in this situation, this example was for one of our clients. They came to us and we sat down and we did a DFAA and we did a process FMEA, one sitting after another. And we came up with 60 design for automation recommendations. 40 of those recommendations were actually adopted by the customer. We identified 136 potential risks. And from all of that, we created a 50-page technical URS. And the acronym here is User Requirements Specification. So, spending the time doing the DFA, doing the PFMEA, and then creating a really strong URS is what it's all about when you start looking at automation. A lot of these machine integrators who you would be purchasing the automation from, they will ask you to pay, at PO, you'll pay a certain percentage. At SAT, FAT, these acceptance tests, you'll pay a certain percentage. And eventually you'll buy off the piece of machinery to the URS that you have given that machine integrator. So drafting that URS in a clinical manner is super important, or else you will not get, at the end of the day, you will not get the piece of automation that you expect or that you need to do the job at hand. Okay. Moving on then to my final topic, which is device history record. Like we all know why we need them. She needs a production record. It's an FDA, Health Canada, ISO 1345 requirement. It ensures traceability, and it has a very important role in your quality management system. So we all know it needs to be done. I would say to you as well that if you actually capture your data well, that data can be used exceptionally well for your CAPA, for your corrective and preventative action investigation afterwards. It can help tremendously with process improvements. And if you actually ever go to a recall, God forbid, it will help you tremendously in that effort. So capturing data, you shouldn't just do it to tick the regulatory requirement. You should do it for all these other reasons. And I've just put there on the actual sheet, you can see an interesting snippet in relation to warning letters from the FDA in 2016. 80% of the warning letters had got to do with improper or error-prone documentation. So, in one of our facilities, we actually manufacture a surgical robot. That particular robot, there's the robotic arm and there's the camera module that goes with it. There are 1,200 parts associated with that entire assembly. The DHR comprises of 140 pages, and in this instance, the DHR is a manual paper-based system. And then, if you take each page, has approximately 10 to 15 entries. So when you look at the full DHR for one device, you have something in the region of 1,400 to 2,000 data entries in total. So you have just a a tremendous opportunity for error. Now, so you have two options. I think number one, you either figure out ways of actually making that data entry on behalf of the operators more systematic, come up with simple tools to help their job. Or number two, you look at bringing technology to bear and you look at bringing into place an EDHR, an electronic device history record, which will actually, through technology, you can take out a lot of the risks associated with this. I'll just show you here on the other page, and probably didn't come out very well on the screen, but these are just snippets of all the errors that are actually coming up in those paper-based DHRs, missing signature, dates that are incorrect, a date that's missing, mismatch on revisions, and the list goes on. So if you're dealing with very, very complex electromechanical systems, I would encourage you to look at EDHR. There are loads of systems out there. And in actual fact, a lot of the other industries are well ahead of the medical industry in relation to capturing all that data automatically. One of our customers, we make inkjet cartridges for one of our customers, and we actually make, I would say, hundreds of millions of cartridges per year. And each of those cartridges has about 5 pages of data, both raw material data associated with, the individual components that are going into that particular cartridge, but also we capture all of the parametric data, all of the test results, if there's a pressure, the results of the vision engine, the XY theta. So all of that data is captured. So we have hundreds of millions of cartridges and about 5 pages, A4 pages of data per cartridge. And that system has been in place for 15 years. So the medical industry is really just catching up. Software validation headaches are probably one of the reasons why it has been slow on the uptake. But now most companies are moving towards EDHR, and especially if your volumes are high, your complexity is high, I feel EDHR is the only way to go. And then just to close out on that topic, then, if you can see here, paper-based, just a comparison, paper-based versus an EDHR. So obviously, inexpensive and quick, paper wins out. However, if you want to be really standardized, if you want to be able to access the information easily afterwards and do various kind of data analytics, the EDHR system wins out all the time. If you want to take away the dependency from the operator or the individual inspector, the EDHR wins out. If you want to extract the data afterwards and you want to bring in more reliability, the actual EDHR system wins out. So that was my presentation. So I suppose in summary, if you just think back, design DFX, do your DFX. Once you have finished your functional design activity, spend the time, do a good DFX. Message number one. Message number two, be careful with your supply chain, especially if you have complex electromechanical systems. Lead times are horrendous. It's a mild field out there, so be careful. Once you're ready for production, please do a process FMEA, spend the time, give your engineers the time, the focus to do that well, because that will save you untold trouble later on. And then for your documentation, if you have the ability to move to an EDHR system, do so, because again, that will give you lots of data that can be used for lots of other purposes, not only just for your DHR. So thank you very, very much for your time. And I'll hand you back to Lynn.
Scott, we can't see you yet.
I was beginning to wonder, Lynn, had I been speaking to myself for the last
No, we'll get John back on camera. Scott, you're not on camera yet.
It's an odd feeling, Kevin. I did try and turn my camera on there to be with you in that moment of silence, but
yes,
it took this long to get it to come on. But that was a great talk. I think it's our worlds meet at a critical moment as we start from very early on with our design, create something from nothing, and then make a few of them. Maybe, like I said, maybe make hundreds in some cases, and then you have a huge responsibility to help companies make their product and launch it into the world and make lots and lots of them available as they're required.
Great. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Wow, remarkable. I will remind let our audience know that the recording will be available on our website afterwards. If like me, you found about 25 things of importance in there and you didn't get a chance to catch it all, then you will be able to review. And I totally appreciate our two speakers focusing. We always emphasize a philosophy of these events. We want people to be real. We want value to be real. We don't want vague points like you hear in a lot of other talks. We want very specific, useful information that you can take back to your company and make a difference in your life. So we certainly do have a number of questions, and for those in the audience, you'll notice a Q&A tab on your interface there. And feel free to add more things, and we'll go through those, and I'll inject a few more things as we go as well. And we have about 15 minutes to get some more wisdom. So one question for Kevin: can you talk about the right time for automation as part of the manufacturing strategy, and some particular things that you need to think about early enough?
Yeah. Just by way of comparison, Scott, just to give people a sense, bespoke automation is expensive. However, if you have product longevity, if you have the necessary volumes, it can be a great investment. So you need to actually figure out that investment side really well, first of all. But once you make the decision that automation is the way to go, then, in terms of drafting a URS and negotiating with a machine integrator and having that machine integrator deliver a product that you have bought off and then in turn validate it, that particular journey is probably 2 years. So you need to be conscious that amount of time is going to elapse during that time period. So I would say watch your timing is critical. And then the second thing, as I mentioned earlier, the actual detail that's in the user requirement specification document is super, super important, because that's the document that's the method that you will use to hold the machine integrator's feet to the fire to make sure that they are delivering a machine that does what you want that does what you want it to do. So those would be the two things that I would say to kind of keep in mind and address really, really quickly once you make the decision that automation is the right answer for your product.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, question for John. How did you execute the 1345 regulatory documentation quickly for the ventilator, since this is such a big piece?
Yes, I saw someone noted that documenting what you're doing just takes a lot of effort, and a big part of the project, and absolutely. So we did, right? And so this is a class 3 medical device that documentation is done, and then delivered to Health Canada to demonstrate that you've done it. And so in this case, we do this a lot, right? So we're trained and experienced, used to doing risk analyses, capturing requirements, architectures, specifications, verification plans, verification reports, all of that, including validation, is something that we're used to doing. We have templates that allow us to do it. And so that's important. But I would say the most important part is to take it seriously. And so if you actually use use it. These documents aren't created instead of or as well as the work that you're doing. They're part of the work that you're doing. And of course, I talked about for the ventilator, this was time and scope were of the essence, and cost was something we were prepared to incur to get things done. So we just had more people. And so as well as the designers doing the designing, we had people whose job it was to make the documents. And then we had routine reviews of those documents to make them real and using them. And it all came to a head. We'd made commitments, or we were very keen to be done by the end of May as a first iteration. And so we had a whole cascade of a verification using multiple units, 7 units being tested at one time, various elements of the verification that we had planned. In total, there were, the whole project had 106 people inside Starfish committed to it at that point. There was a lot of activity happening. And at the end of the Friday, the end of May, we looked at it, and there just were too many holes to be comfortable submitting. So we were rather dejected, and we stopped, and I had a bunch of calls to make to build people's confidence back up and enthusiasm. But what built my enthusiasm back up and my confidence was the next Saturday morning, we sat and we went through our risk management review, and we looked at the gaps that we had. And there were a few. There were about a couple of gaps that we needed to close, but we tested them against our risk management plan, and we identified what was the essential pieces that we needed to complete in order to be satisfied. They weren't just big unknown problems we had to start on. We had a risk management plan that we'd already beaten into shape, understood, made real, and we were able then to use it as a tool to let us get to conclusion faster. So I would say that's the answer is, we're used to doing it. We have the infrastructure, but we took it seriously. And then as a result of doing it, we got done faster.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a question from Glenn back for Kevin. So asking about for whom is the URS actually written? Is it for the owner of the product, or the CM, or both?
It's written by the OEM, by the owner of the product, for the machine integrator. So it's in simple terms, it's the description of what you want. I want a machine. I want it to do A, B, C, and D. And not only does it give that description, but then it also defines how you, as the recipient of the machine, how you will evaluate that machine at what they call the FAT and SAT stages. So the FAT is you go to the machine integrator site, and before they pack up the device, you will go through a sequence of tests. And you will have documented in your URS, these are the tests that I will do. You will have agreed with the machine integrator that these are the results of those tests that I expect. And if you don't get to these results, thou shalt not ship the machine. And then what happens is the machine then is packed, brought to the OEM site, and then a similar set of tests are done again. And then that will be the final buy-off. And then you'll go on through your IQ, OQ, PQ at that stage.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, question for John from Arnaud. So if you look at the trade-off between cost, scope, and time, could as it based on the type of startup, could it also be based on the maturity of the company, building phase, young brand, or established brand, and sort of any broader insights you have about those trade-offs?
Thank you, Arno. That's a fantastic question, and made a mental note to add that to the presentation if I do it again, because I think that's essential. If you're Medtronic and you're coming to market with a new product, or then it's you're in a different world than some new startup that nobody's ever heard of, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have a brand, as you say, that is recognized and respected, and there has expectations around it. And if you come to market with a product that isn't fully baked, even if the individuals that you're working with are content with it, the spillover onto your brand and your other products could be significant, and it's just a risk that large companies aren't prepared to take. Also, large brands have two other factors. One is that the scale of their launch, so the system can be launched very quickly, very rapidly in large number of jurisdictions. And so they will typically want to do that, and they typically want the product to be well baked before it's done. And then there's another piece that, as we talk to the incumbents, and this is we talk to incumbents, and they talk to about the regulatory experience. When they work with regulators, the regulators have, they perceive, a much higher bar for them than they do for startups. And those, if you think about it, you accept it, it makes sense to me. If you think about why that would be, one is, first of all, there's a long history of stories back and told and back and forward and disputes over the years, which clearly probably has built up some scar tissue on both in the relationship. But also the regulator knows that as once the product's launched, it's going to go into market and be distributed all over the place. Whereas a small startup is more likely to have a gentle launch, and so therefore the bar can be a little lower. And that's what kind of leads to the classic exit strategy of, as a startup, to prove your market, get the regulatory clearance, and then make your exit. So I totally agree with your question. With what the answer that's inherent in your question. Does it depend on brand and who you are? Are you a young brand, established brand in the building phase? And yes, it very much does.
Mm-hmm. Okay, question for Kevin. You mentioned obsolete parts as being one of the things that you see. Can you give a few other examples of challenges that you find in your reviews?
Yeah, so I would say when you look at general DFX, the top Pareto items would be obsolescence, lack of test points, the layout itself, where you have a situation where, let's say, good principles of layout won't have been followed in some instances. Those would be the three biggest Pareto items that we see. And I would say obsolescence is the one that you probably need the most the better tools to find, the better relationships with the suppliers to find, because it's not information that's readily available about when part X is going to become obsolete, but it's happening all of the time. The suppliers are reducing their number of parts or SKUs that they're offering to the marketplace. So there's parts becoming obsolete all of the time.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, question for John. So from Harry, you talk about the software risk assessment. Class C software is kind of something that scares a lot of people. And what was how did you get through that quickly?
Yeah, so we took a very thorough approach to this. We took the responsibility of a life-sustaining device very seriously, and as I said, built this software, Class D software, from the ground up. And the key thing there was having a really well-defined architecture up front that was simple, was well documented, and then enforcing it. And it's kind of, we're blessed that in our software development team we have some great experience, and so the person leading the software development work, and then a colleague of equivalent experience took separate roles, and these roles are well defined. So the first role was to write the code, understanding the architecture and executing against it. And the role of the other person was to deliver was to enforce the architecture and make sure that the edges of the clearly defined redundancies and dependencies were not fudged by someone who was trying to solve a problem. And so that rigor was a big part of the success. And then, of course, having that all in the framework of a risk analysis that was based on the architecture as laid out. In the deep intensity of all of this, as I spoke online with the software manager about, how are we looking for a verification on this? What's the risk situation? Is this a software design that one person can hold in their head as well as it being written down? And absolutely, he said, let me show you. And he showed me one page with about 6 boxes on it, and he said, this is the architecture, and this is what we're executing against. And they did. And then I talked to his colleague who wrote the code, and he just, the two people love each other very much in a platonic way. But it's like, wow, it's so annoying that he just keeps enforcing the architecture, but I know it's important, and I'm pleased with how it's working. So I would say that was the approach that we took.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, a question from Fiona K for Kevin, which I'll paraphrase a little bit. It's about the importance of vendors who have medical experience. If you're sourcing a vendor, say for injection molding, how important is it that they have medical experience to facilitate your ISO 13485 compliance?
Yeah, it's probably essential, Scott. If you look, a big part of your ISO 13485 requirements is that you can show, and even for the FDA regulations, you can show your supplier selection criteria, and then afterwards you have to show that you are doing audits on that particular supplier. Depending on the frequency, etc., of the audits will depend on the criticality of the component in question. So you're going to have to do a little bit of a risk analysis there. But all of that you need to show. There is a lot of molders out there with medical device experience. There's, in actual fact, if you look at all of the big guys that are out there, almost every single one of them do medical devices at one stage or of one type or another. So I would say they're not hard to find. But yes, if you're making a medical device, I would suggest, yes, go to a molder that has medical device experience. That would be especially the case if the injected parts are going into a sterile assembly environment. In that situation, you're probably going to have the molded parts molded in some form of clean room. You're going to be double bagging those parts. You're going to be taking them into the clean room in the manufacturing location, and having somebody that has experience in all of those areas is really important.
Great, thanks. Great answer. So for each of you, in about a minute, I'll start with John. What makes you really happy when a client shows up, and what makes you concerned when a potential client shows up?
Meeting new clients just makes me happy. So that's so there's that. So I think a new and exciting challenge where they understand their market to an appropriate extent and have some ideas of direction, but yet are flexible and willing to have a conversation about what is the proper product that would meet their needs. It's a concern. Well, it's not a concern when someone meets up at their much earlier in the stage of not understanding their market. We just have a conversation that probably a cost-effective thing for them would be to go understand their market first. So I'm going to punt on the last part and say no. I don't get too worried when I meet new people.
Great, Kevin. I'll pass that question to you.
So I agree with John's sentiment. Meeting new customers is brilliant, especially new customers that come with new technology. So and especially inside, if you look at the medical device segment as a whole, the larger OEMs, we all know who they are. They have a lot of internal R&D, but they also grow through acquisition of smaller companies with super technology. So for all of us, that those companies coming with that new technology, with that new idea, that's the lifeblood that keeps everything going and keeps everything interesting. So love meeting you guys. What would I be afraid of when they arrive? If they have no money. Scott.
That's a great and very honest answer. Well,
it's kind of hard to do something out of nothing.
We asked for real. How real is that? So with that, I will thank both of our speakers for their wonderful presentations and insights and honesty, and I'll pass back to Lynn for closing remarks.
Excellent. Thanks again, Kevin. John, really appreciate you being a part of this webinar today. And I thank everybody for joining us and look forward to an announcement in the near future for our January webinar. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent.